On the entrepreneurial side, we're coders, programmers, that grew up outside the system. Just like an algorithm, an AI algorithm, it has learned from all the past.
I was talking to you before about like being a futurist and that sort of thing. It's this type of thing that I believe we can use to actually help transition and evolve humanity in cool ways. It's this idea of big data. Often stays in the realm of business. Welcome to the game of frequencies.
The humanitarian innovation hub of Canada, and at this point, the world. A catalyst division, as well as the empowerment of the people throughout the earth.
So you're saying as you dig deeper, find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos.
In general, we look for new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we So don't laugh, that's really true.
I suppose you could consider me as a symbolic linguist. There's a certain language.
The earth is ravaged and the animals are dying. A new tribe of people shall come into the earth from many colors, breeding classes, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They shall be known as the warriors of the rainbow, from Hopi prophecy.
Hi there, my name is Peter, and I'm about to take you through a little bit of a journey into what's called the evolution of everything. There's a few reasons for this description and all of this kind of setup here. My apologies for the messiness. This is kind of ad hoc. Ken and I both decided to do this today based on a lot of the different communications we've had, and of course we decided to do it outside because it's just a really nice day to do this. So let me just kind of dive into this. Again, my apologies for kind of the external noises and whatnot. This is quite just informal, and I just wanted to kind of bring you guys into the conversation, the sort of realities that we build our conversations on. So very, very informal, casual people. So anyways, let me just jump into this here. So we've called it the natural evolution of everything. I know it's a big fancy way of kind of saying we're trying to grasp from a systems level approach. We're trying to grasp this concept of evolving humanity from, let's say, point A to point B. And if that's even possible, and if we can really document a process for getting this templated into a space where people can go through this process of evolution. So it's a very templated modular approach. As you'll see here, we've got this kind of circle with a bunch of stuff around it. I'll explain that as I go along. Again, my apologies for a little bit messy, but we'll get through it. We can do this in a lot more depth down the road, but for now, I think this will really give us a little bit of a baseline for starting the conversations down the road. So let's begin. All of this is built on a very, very vast library of research documents, of books, of testimonies, of reports. So there is a very large bibliography that will be attached to any kind of documentation that results from this. So there's no worries there about this just coming out of my ass or something. I don't know. So anyway, that said, the first thing I do want to kind of preface with is there are a few assumptions. There's a few prerequisites to this conversation. I'm placing this now out there just so that you're aware. If you find yourself a little bit out over your head, then perhaps these prerequisites are not met, which is fine, but it's just something you need to be aware of. So the first one is this assumption. Here I'm going up here. This assumption that the veil exists. Okay, so there's this idea out there that there are higher frequencies, higher realities, lower realities. Often it's called the veil, right? Seeing behind the veil, altered states. Here we've got altered realities resulting from this understanding or this movement between the veil, as we call it. So that's the one assumption that I'm hoping that you're coming to this conversation with, is this idea that the veil exists. It's very well proven, very well documented in many different ways, from science to shamanics to First Peoples, etc., etc. NDEs, there's some other examples up here that help illustrate and provide evidence for this assumption that the veil exists. The second one is that, again, through evidence, testimony, and experience, we can really point to this concept that we can move between these realities, or in front of and behind the veil, if you will, in that way. That there is this movement, this transition between these states that is possible. And that's the other assumption that we need to really have before this is going to work. If you're not really into this, if this doesn't really work for you, if the veil doesn't exist where you're at, then perhaps this isn't the best conversation. Just forewarning you as we dive into this. Okay, so that's that. Moving right along. This circle here, I mean, it can represent many different things, but ultimately here what we're looking at is we've built out a template which helps us to articulate this process of evolution of humanity. This can be done at a micro level with individual items. This currently is at a macro level, so part of what we'll show here is history of time and history of things moving along as we get to full circle back to where we are currently today. So we'll do a bit of a history lesson, and then we'll talk about some of the specifics of phasing and things like that. So I'll get right into that. So if we start back with a bit of a history lesson, what we're talking about is through history we can track evolution, we can track the movement of consciousness, we can track the development of our understanding of genetics to essentially a reductionist system levels unification. So there's a jarbled bunch of words, but essentially we're saying we can track through history, we can track evolution, consciousness, and genetics, because they're going to be key to us kind of getting to where we are today. So what we see is, originally we have way back when, thousands of years ago, we've got first peoples, natives, people who lived off of the land. They didn't understand or have a conception of industry, of obviously things like digital, all of the things that we kind of take for granted today in our modern world. They just had this really interesting, cool, very strong connection with nature. And from that, their entire civilization developed, thrived, generation after generation for thousands of years with just that primary connection with nature. Yes, they innovated, and yes, they developed and evolved over time, but it was really that key natural law and order that really kept them in that phase, we'll say, where they connected with the natural world pretty much solely. They didn't really move on into other stuff. Eventually, though, of course, we get this idea of somebody wanting to take these ideas and box them and sell them, or maybe perhaps make them better, innovate on them. I can create a better tribe, and my tribe's going to do this or that versus your tribe, and we're going to be more effective and efficient. We're going to grow more. I'm just using this as a very basic example. But eventually what we start to do is we start to get into this idea of external, focusing on the external world around us. What is this thing in front of me, and how do I grow it, and how do I make it look better and different? How do I understand the interconnectedness between that thing and that thing, trees and sky, or whatever it is that ends up being? It was really this focus on the external world. We can see this throughout the ages, from philosophers talking all the way through to we got the Industrial Revolution. Like, that's kind of far-reaching as we move along, but it's really this external motivated, this external focus for our moving forward, our progression. That really did affect things. I mean, we remember back to that first peoples. We've got the natural law, and all of a sudden, which really did incorporate and encompass far more than just external things, right? We've got our shamans, and we've got our medicine people, and we've got those traditional movements and dances and ceremonies that reflected far more than just the external world, because they had deep belief systems in the internal workings and how they all interconnected. We won't get into details, but that's really a fair statement to say. To all of a sudden having this just almost primarily external motivation. I mean, it wasn't entirely secular for a long time, but it certainly was a prime motivator for scholars and academics across the board. We have this interesting period here that we're calling it the geocentric period, really, where this idea of reality was really, much like these people, the idea of reality was around natural law. Well, the idea was around this idea, this external concept that the Earth was the center of the universe. Everything revolved around the Earth. It's kind of this geocentric approach. And everything we did way back then really culminated around that central core idea. Of course, there's these guys who suddenly decided to have this idea that, oh, you know what, it's actually, perhaps it's the sun that is the center and we're all rotating around it. Well, oh my goodness. That created what we call a catalyst. That created such an upheaval because reality existed before in a certain way. A fundamental way that it existed was in this geocentric style. And all of a sudden you're saying, no, it's the other way around, it's opposite. And it just created this massive tumultuous time that spanned, I'm not going to get into the details. I'm sure there's people who know more about that stuff, but the idea is eventually we got into this heliocentric idea. But what it did was it ultimately altered the entire reality that we existed in. So previously it was this way, and now this kind of, to use a overused term, paradigm shift into this new reality. That was a really big deal, and I think history really doesn't do a great job at perhaps expressing how critical that moment was to our entire existence. Because we literally believed the Earth was flat, for example, which all of our behaviors and actions are based around this concept that we're going to fall off the end of the Earth if we keep moving too far. To all of a sudden this idea that no, it's this globe thing. I mean, those are big, massive movements in our entire reality, and they affect all facets. So that was a big deal. It's this catalyst movement. We also call this, and this is just taking a step back here from our phased approach, this template approach to describing the evolution of everything. We have this cycle that you can see, and again, I won't get into too much of the details, but you can see it existing on a macro level with, let's say, the decay, the life cycle of living creatures, all the way up to the way the universe operates as far as we understand it today. It really goes through this phase of genesis to growth, to breakdown, disintegration, and then kind of back again, new growth, and so on. So we're basing, again, it's a first principle. It's not too complicated. I don't think it needs too much explanation, and it's fairly straightforward. But this is what we had, is this genesis kind of moving into this growth cycle. This growth cycle, of course, once we get this concept that, there's this external world, and it's much more vast and interesting and tangible than we ever imagined, we start to want to explain it more and more and more. We get more understanding of it. Some interesting results occur, of course. Our big industrial revolution, that was one of the massive outcomes of this kind of mindset. Of course, this idea that we can automate things, that we can produce things much faster and in greater numbers than ever previously we could before, and of course that's where economy comes in and make things cheaper and so on and so forth. But it's really the result of this idea that this external world motivation, understanding the world around us. Of course, don't forget, we used to believe, there's a whole other part to this where we used to believe that there was just as important this connection with the inner workings of reality and life. It doesn't really have room here in this industrial revolution area, this heliocentric area. It really doesn't have much purpose as far as history shows. Of course, we get into this Renaissance, this era of great wealth, of power, of happiness, of social structures being kind of maturing, and all these different subcultures popping up, and it was this time of it's messed up here, but basically we have things like indoctrination, right? You have how many different tenets of, let's say, the Christian faith, all these different sects and denominations of just that one religion. We've got all these other different belief systems that pop up, right? People want you to believe this or that. You get into the business world, we have corporations wanting you to believe in their product, and so you kind of get indoctrinated into these socio-cultural phenomenons where, these different products are part of a generation, and they help shape a generation. That's, again, back to this external focus. We've we've got the results of this Renaissance era. We've got indoctrination, reductionism. That was huge, right? We're talking about breaking everything down into component parts as far as we possibly can. That comes out to help us later, for sure. But I'm just recognizing it as one of those outcomes of this overarching kind of external process. Of course, we get these studies now, and sorry, it's hard to see it there, but universities were really important or critical in pushing whatever knowledge we had out into the mainstream from the very abstract out into the world, right? And how it can be used and applied in different ways. Universities and colleges, post-secondary, was extremely valuable at this time. Moving right along, of course, we transition, in one way we transition all this stuff that we've been building from, let's say, an analog phase into a digital phase. Now, there's a lot of benefits that come from that because we can do things quicker, faster, cheaper, more, that sort of thing. Of course, information now, we see that today's day and age, information can be processed and transferred and bought and sold in so many different ways. It just, this whole external concept it's reaching its pinnacle of effectiveness, if you will. Big data, automation, artificial intelligence, keep going, right? We've made it, in a sense, in terms of that external world. Now, the problem comes in where we can start to see people who are embedded in these various industries and these various domains. They start to see that, wow, they would start to wonder, are we reaching the end? Are we reaching the end of mathematics as we know it? Are we reaching the end of science as we know it? Can we go any further into our understanding of the external world? There's lots of evidence out there to kind of point us in this direction that, we may have focused so much of our time on this external world that we're kind of reaching those limits in a lot of ways. Where you can see it in the world, in the marketplace. How many movies have you seen that are just redos or replications of other movies, right? The templates that people are building toward making films themselves. There's a specific formula for building Hollywood movies, for example, and essentially if you don't follow this template, there are very high odds that it's just never going to fly. And that's because of this templated idea, this externalized template that we've just used to reuse and replicate, recycle the same stuff over and over again. So what we're starting to see is, of course, one of the big results of that is this ego. And I won't get into too much detail of the ego, but of course, I'm sure anybody watching this could list 12 different examples of how the ego build has helped to break down what we currently know as reality. Whether it's power and control measures, fear-based tactics, decisions that people make based on ego, based on their own sense of self, rather than, again, always drawing it back to these guys, where they thrived for so long on this understanding of me, but not just me, but me in my context, my larger context, as part of my tribe, as part of my community, etc. So we start to see this interplay with the ego coming in. And again, it's a natural progression from where we were. Of course, we're going to get bigger egos. We're doing amazing things. We're becoming gods in our own right. There's nothing that we can't produce or reproduce within our physical world. It's amazing, the things we've discovered and created. So that's pretty powerful stuff, and it's really hard to kind of tame that for obvious reasons. But of course, now we kind of circle back up to here. There was a point in time where, I kind of put quantum here because I think this is one of the key precursors to the next catalyst movement here. Really, because yes, we're understanding the external world, and science took us down to that quantum level, but really, as we'll find out later on, that quantum realm is really where we start to see there's this very unique relation, if not a continuum, between external and internal. And it all kind of can be described within the quantum realm. We won't get into that too much right now, but that's really where we start to play with it, and back in the 50s and the 60s and so on. Even further back, but with the physicists of the time. Excuse me. Anyway, we get this interesting interplay between natural law and the institutional model of systems. So again, basing this on the ego and all of the different kind of things that we've been able to create and produce and reproduce, we built this system of institutions, right? We've got all of our systems, our education system, our financial system, our social system. All of these systems have been developed and architected and built upon this idea of, right, back to this heliocentric and the external world around us and how we can make it happen and build our civilization and make it better and whatever, more productive, etc. But again, it's kind of reached its end. And then we've got this interplay between what is now becoming this kind of internal versus external kind of dualism, if you will. People starting to see, hey, you know what? This isn't enough for me. I need more in my existence. So people start, thinking about consciousness, thinking about their own personal connection with nature, maybe with others, as it relates to something more deeper and more satisfying and meaningful or fulfilling. You get the New Age, and you get different tenets and dogmas, all sorts of things coming up as a result of that. But it's really this kind of resurgence of a little bit of what maybe was going on back here with the natural law, perhaps. But what we're finding is, much like a lot of these things along the way, this consciousness, I'm calling it a consciousness revolution, it's still being done kind of within one of these boxes. It's still this kind of unconscious consciousness revolution, if you will, which is a bit strange to conceive of, but we're talking about people who aren't really aware necessarily that they have the capacity to develop their consciousness, their understanding of it, their interactions with it, how it relates to themselves internally and externally. So that's an interesting point, but nonetheless, there is this kind of battle, if you will, going on between the systems now, the external world, and people's understanding of themselves in the context, in their world, in themselves, in their community, etc. It's really quite cool. So we're moving into this, what we call this cosmic kind of phase from the ego. We're building this cosmic understanding. Even if we don't really understand the true power of it or the true nature of it, it's still something that people are doing. You see, I don't know, the examples I think of is how many Eastern type traditions have made their way to the West, right? Because think about it, in the West we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of progression and technology and advancement and evolution. In the East, it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. We're really in very different stages of our evolution in terms of societies and whatnot. And a lot of the Eastern traditions, again, looking back to this natural law and order, they were operating just fine for thousands of years, doing whatever they did, and it included this understanding, this innate understanding of their internal workings and how it's interconnected and whatnot. So, just as that example, you get all sorts of things like, I live in a city in North America, in Canada, and just around town here, I probably can think of 25 different locations that offer training on yoga and various different permutations of yoga, and hot yoga seems to be the big one these days. And they're doing it so that they can probably feel good, a bit of mindfulness, probably a little bit so they can look sexy, maybe. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but there's this kind of notion of taking this idea, this ancient idea, and using it for my external purposes today. So there's really still not a lot of that grasp of what they're doing and the reason for it. Not entirely. I mean, I know that there's a mindfulness movement that's happening, and it's growing, and a global consciousness movement that's growing and more understanding. We're getting research being done in these quantum consciousness areas and so on and so forth. So it's definitely making its movement. But here's where it gets really interesting. We're almost here. We're like 2 minutes to midnight. We're almost at this moment here. And we have essentially two choices, and I'm saying that very loosely, two paths. We're either just going to continue the cycle again. Maybe we do have some sort of world war or some sort of catastrophic event that kind of brings us back to the beginnings, and then we just start all over again. Where have we heard that before? Or we can jump. We can make a quantum jump along this path to a new reality. It happens in the same way as anything else, through this kind of breakdown and disintegration cycle, but it's through this a process of evolution that we can show you how it is possible at a systems level, empirically backed, that we can provide a mechanism for evolving, jumping through this understanding of the external versus the internal consciousness. All of a sudden, bam, we can take you or give you the means for which you can kind of jump into that new evolved state, if you will. So that's kind of the breakdown of this. There's a lot more to it, and I probably missed a few items, but it's that general gist of moving through the pattern of history, evidence showing time and time again we're building through this genesis to the growth, to the breakdown, disintegration, and we have this decision point here. We can either just kind of continue that cycle again, which history has shown us has occurred in the past, or if you're like myself, you may think that this is a special, rare opportunity in time where we can do something different. We have everything we need. We just have to reimagine what it means to be that new form of human. It's, I don't say that lightly, but it is in a sense straightforward. But how you get there and getting there is another story. So let me kind of jump and shift over here for a second. To this, what does it take to evolve? What does it take to get people going along here and not kind of missing the boat and hopping onto this new kind of wave? I won't get into all the details, but I'll show you the basics of the foundational principle behind this. So it starts with energy, frequency, and vibration. This isn't something that I'm going to get too into, except to say that this is a known. This is what we know. Everything's made out of energy, frequency, vibration. It's as simple as that. From there, we get into these programmable blueprints, and we say that from, let's say, a programming computer-based digital systems approach. Everything can be encapsulated in a chunk of code, if you will. They're called different things depending on what language you're using, but essentially you're building out these blueprints that you can then replicate over and over again. It's no different from creating, let's say, a video game, or essentially any corporation or corporate entity you can think of probably has some kind of blueprint for how to build itself. I know the startup community really works on specific templates or models for business growth and things like that. It's kind of like that, right? We take this energy, frequency, vibration, we plug it into some programmable templates or blueprints. Now, it's from there that things get interesting, because this is all naturally occurring. This isn't something we're kind of making up. We're just drawing attention to it as it exists in the natural world. Then we get these blueprints kind of are exposed to this quantum realm, which is, indeterminate. It's got probability points. It's got superpositions. Is it, are you going to go left? Are you going to go right? Is it going to be both? We don't know yet. It's kind of this ether, if you will. Some places call it that, I guess. And of course, then you break it down into the tangible, the more tangible, which is this atomic anatomy, right? Atomic structures, compounds, etc., which are then broken out into, of course, things like genetics, things like DNA, those fundamental building blocks of the structures we see around us. Of course, DNA being the big one there that we're focused on these days, and genetics. So the result of that is things like we can start to map things like evolution. We can start to see evidence of things like epigenetics. We can start tracking behavior. The social sciences do this really well and have been doing it for a long time. So there's lots of claim-based evidence reasoning for some of this stuff. What we're saying is, and this is the crux of this, from here you get a conscious state. Whatever these combinations are, this conscious state gives us that human component, right? Instead of, let's say, a tree, perhaps. This conscious state makes us human. Of course, we can just rinse and repeat that over time, just like we've done here, right? You're born, you grow, you start to get old, and you die, and you just rinse and repeat over and over and over again. What we're suggesting here is, if you alter this conscious state, and we can point you to tons of research that over the many years that have done just this, playing with this altered conscious state. This is where that veil comes in, right? Right back to this assumption of the veil. This is where the crux of this comes in. By altering the state of consciousness, you can tap into, we'll say, this higher frequency of being. Think about preconditions like the autism spectrum. Think of things like LSD studies or other psychotropics or what have you. Think of various mystical experiences and shamanic experiences and things like that. We talk about it in every single traditional history on the planet, that there's specific special events or experiences or people that lead to this higher frequency of being. And then, of course, you come down, or you go back to in front of the veil, right? There's this movement between this higher state of being, and then once it's not being altered anymore, you kind of go back to this this baseline again, and you kind of move up and down, if you will. One example, I guess, we'll just hop over here for a second. One example by a guy named Hawkins. He came up with this visualization. So he actually based this on kind of a linear numerical scale, if you will, from 0, I think, up to 1,000 here. And really, you're just passing through these thresholds. You start at fear. As you move up the ranks, if you will, you get into this state of courage. You move up again into this state of love, up again into enlightenment, and then, of course, ultimately, once you pass beyond the threshold of enlightenment, you get into what he describes as this divine grace. Now, this is one example in one kind of paradigm, but I think about it in many other terms. It's the same concept, though, really. Like, if I think about it in gaming terms, that's a skill tree. So you move up your levels through, like, if I'm thinking of, like, first-person shooter war games or something. You go from, use the military model of the recruit up to the corporal, up to the captain, up to the admiral, or what have you. Education models, so we get to see things like Bloom and his taxonomy, or we get the depths of knowledge, or the rigor charts and things like that, where it's just mapping on a continuum, kind of linearly up through the ranks. So it's really much like that. So here, what we're talking about, back to kind of the conscious state and the altered state producing this higher frequency of being, what we're talking about, and I think that's really ultimately what we're saying, is the goal to evolve humanity is finding ways to sustain that higher frequency of being. Now, I don't necessarily mean let's all take some psychedelic drugs and just stay high for the rest of our lives. That's not what I'm getting at all. What I'm suggesting is, through very specific tasks, experiences, studies, etc., we can find ways to alter the state, the conscious state of being, and spend more time, let's say, behind the veil, and less time in front of the veil, if that works. So it's about that sustained higher frequency management, I guess, if you will, that we're going for. So, that being said, kind of going over here to the why. Why do we want to evolve? Why do we want to sustain that higher frequency? And sorry, why do we want to sustain the higher frequency? It's to evolve. It's because what we're suggesting back up to here, if we don't make this leap, if we don't make that leap to something qualitatively different from how we are today, I think we can all agree that things aren't working so well for us right now. And there's far too many problems to kind of go through them in detail. But ultimately, this is that Goldilocks moment where we're at that kind of intersection in time, space, where we need to draw, kind of pull in here, we need to draw from our experiences in the past, including these major catalyst moments, and we need to create our own reality. And that is pretty much the goal. We have to get there. Next question is how? How do we do that? Like how did we even conceive of this? How is this even a thing? Why are you watching this? Is because throughout time, something that I wasn't really focusing on too much earlier, throughout time, like this, for example, this movement between the geocentric and the heliocentric, really we're talking about guys like Copernicus, right? They really fought the good fight at that time. They were, and countless people since, have held these special characteristics, these unique, rare gifts, talents. If you want to look through, again, back to this evolutionary kind of template model, you know, you may have some of these people who have had altered items within their DNA or behavior patterns or their epigenetics, right? There may be different combinations and nuances within the structure that allowed them to be that special, unique person. But truly, we can point at a large number of people throughout time and history who just they were different, more, better, advanced, whatever you want to call it. They were different. Okay, with its own issues, but that's the point, is that it takes special, rare individuals to come up with this kind of overarching, higher systems level idea where we're not just unconsciously conscious, right? We're actually able to connect all these dots and bring them all together so that we can form a structure and a templated process. That's the key here for allowing people, if they choose, to go through the last stages of this evolutionary path to here, rather than just repeating the cycle again. And it takes these special, rare individuals to do that. And so what I mean, I know this is a kind of a lot of conversation to get to that single point, but it's really key that we get to the whole point of this presentation is to I guess point out that we need to validate these special, rare individuals. It has to occur, because if we lose them, if we continue to call them crazy, if we continue to marginalize and stream them out of the normalized reality, the chances of us just magically, randomly leaping off into this new reality is pretty slim. And again, science can validate that statement. So we need to be able to validate that there is this epigenetic evolutionary process going on at the micro level and in special, rare individuals additionally. And if we can find a way, if you can help us find a way to validate this, to sign off on the fact that the person that came up with this is well within their rights, well within the normal kind of range of human understanding, knowledge, without the need to label things like schizophrenic or bipolar or ADHD or what have you, then we can take this thing and start to move it into the mainstream. We need these special, rare individuals because we still need to execute on this, and this can't be executed without a kind of consilience of these like-minded individuals, because it takes, again, to come up with this, it takes rare skill sets, rare experiences, rare preconditions, etc., to be able to kind of come up with stuff like this. And this sort of mindset that we need to allow to continue to do this work. If we just push them aside and just continue to marginalize them, then we're setting ourselves up for whatever society and what have you brings to us. So Ken's in the background going, I don't know what that means. That's pretty much all I got.
Death.
So, death?
Yeah.
Death! Anyway, so that's pretty much what we've got. There's lots more to it than this, but we wanted to kind of start with this. So thanks for watching.